All right, everyone, welcome. It's April already, goodness me, April the 3rd. And I think everybody, or many people, myself, I'm recovering from a very busy weekend of watching racing, although unfortunately I only got to watch the races from behind my phone and my computer. I didn't get to head to Oceanside, unfortunately, this year. But a super weekend of racing, I think, overall. A mixture of joy, a mixture of some tears. I think the flag was raised by many of the age groupers. Some fantastic stories that we've already heard from this last weekend. Lawrence Delisle, overall amateur at Texas, 70.3. Jordan Blanco in Ironman South Africa, qualifying to Hawaii, winning her age group. Emily Lanta, second at Oceanside overall. Dale Steyer, a huge PR and basically season goal accomplished. That doesn't mean your season should be over, Dale, but super. Jeff Broughton, third in his age group. Hallie Nicole getting hit by a car less than a year ago and thinking that she would probably almost never go and race again, coming back and racing in Miami and Olympic distance, getting third overall, massively proud of her. And a bunch of athletes that just had really, really good feelings for the weekend and getting their seasons off to a great start. I will say that one of the things I noticed this weekend that I think is worth, I'll save it for the written piece, but it's worth reading my question of the week in Coach's Bulletin this week as I talk about the Oceanside bike ride and some of the emotional reaction that some athletes had that maybe go to Oceanside as a race on an annual basis and felt a little disappointed potentially in their bike rides. And in further examination, the course this year, for one reason or another, was several minutes slow. And in fact, if you equaled your time from last year, it ended up being a very good bike ride. And so I talk about that in this week's Coach's Bulletin to provide perspective on and analyzing your own race results and making sure that it's not always your split that tells the whole story. So I just encourage you to read Coach's Bulletin this week. This Thursday, I'm out, so we're going to have a revised schedule of meetings with Matt as I'm actually at a photo shoot all day. We've got the second book coming out, which I'm not sure if I've told you guys yet, but we have a second book coming out called The Fast Track Triathlete, which is all about integrating triathlon training, Ironman training into a very, very busy schedule. Much of the stuff you already know because you get hounded, but we're doing a photo shoot for the strength component of that, the revised strength program that we're doing, which actually will be embedded and infiltrated into your guys' training programs once we've completed it. So I'll be out all Thursday on that. So there will be no meetings with Matt this Thursday. Today we're going to talk about open water swimming, and we're going to talk about it less as the skills in open water and more in terms of what you can do in a swimming pool to help you bridge or carry your swimming pool performance to open water. So many athletes don't have the opportunity either over the course of many months in the winter months where it's colder, or just because of their geography and where they live, don't have the opportunity to actually train and practice very much in an open water environment. And yet our racing occurs in an open water environment. We are, without doubt, when we start and toe the line in our Olympic distance, Ironman, half Ironman race, whatever the distance, we will be with many of our friends in a highly dynamic environment with bodily contact, chop, wind, waves, sun, everything else that goes along with it. It is what our sport is. And yet most of our training for the vast majority of triathletes is completing in a pool environment. And so I want to spend a few minutes today. This is a little quick and dirty today, but I want to spend a few minutes adding a little bit of perspective on really three major points that I think are really important in pool swimming to try and help you become an open water swimmer. What I'm going to ignore today is training prescription, because that's already embedded in your program. So we're not going to talk about the specific sets that help you get ready for the familiarization and the physiological demands of your racing This is a little bit more of a skill component and some things that you can think about when you're swimming alone, or actually when you're swimming in a group environment, such as a squad environment, much as like we have in San Francisco, or you might have in your master's program wherever you live. It's a really timely topic after a couple of races this weekend presented some challenge. There was some wind and chop at the Galveston, Texas 70.3, and there was very challenging conditions at Ironman South Africa this weekend. And in fact, one of our athletes, Jordan Blanco, who ended up winning our age group overall, had a super swim, but particularly had a super swim relative to athletes that we know are significantly faster than her in the pool. And so relative to trained pool potential, her swim was way better than those that maybe should have better open water conditions. And the reason she was able to do that is she's very familiar with open water, and she has the skills to actually deploy on race day, and so relative to others had a super day. So it's a really timely, good feeling that we sort of do that to start. I already talked about this a little bit, but let's frame it with this. So we always talk about race performance relative to train potential. And across the board, swim, bike, and run, we always look for athletes in a utopian state to try and get very, very close to their trained potential. Some athletes are better than that physiologically and what they bring with their mindset. But in the swim particularly, with the assumption that the course is measured accurately, which is a bold assumption, when we would think about your trained potential, what we would sort of think in terms of is the pace that you can hold per 100 in a swimming pool relative to what you can hold in open water. That's the correlation of your trained potential into your race potential. And if we move, as I said, course accuracy, but we also move chop and current, etc., the biggest determining factor to you as an amateur athlete maximizing your race potential relative to train potential is probably swimming in a straight line. In order to do that, you need to have a great awareness of your surroundings, a great awareness of the course. You need to be familiar in open water and comfortable in open water so that you can focus on swimming in a straight line and focus on deploying your best trained potential. And so familiarity breeds confidence. You have to have the skills to actually go and execute and maintain the straight line. And ultimately, when you come out of the water, you want to come out of the water as fast as you possibly can, but with low physiological and emotional stress, because that's going to carry throughout the whole of your day. So we want to first talk about sighting. And there's a couple of elements that become really, really important when we consider about sighting. The first is the skill itself. So actually, how do you sight? And the second is the conditioning of that sighting. So the first part of sighting itself, we have to, in order to effectively sight, and tangentially, I'm going to add the sighting video into this week's Coaches Bulletin, but you can just go to your education tab, you can search sighting and have a look at a video we've done with the actual technical component of sighting. But it is a skill and it is something that needs to be learned. But our ultimate goal, if we value the importance of swimming in a straight line, we are going to have to sight very, very frequently. If it's choppy conditions, or if it's a confusing course, or if there are a lot of people around us, we're going to have to sight frequently, every other stroke, every 4 to 6 strokes, single arm, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every 4 to 6 strokes that you might need to sight at the start of the race, or if conditions are challenging. If it's a calm condition, it's clear, you can see the buoy, you're still sighting every 8 to 10 cycles. And so from a skill component, it's really important that you learn how to do it well. But by doing it well, the outcome must be that you can integrate sighting into your regular swimming without losing your tempo, your rhythm of the stroke, and your propulsion under the water. Because ultimately, so much of effective swimming is being able to lock into good, fast tempo, good rhythm, while moving as much water as we possibly can backwards so that you can move forwards. So you need to cycle through this really good rhythm. And we need to be able to integrate that into your stroke. If every single time you lift your head to see where you are going, hence sighting, it diminishes or throws you off of rhythm, it's going to have a big magnifying effect on your overall pace per 100. And so out of this video, I encourage you to go and look at the sighting video and start to integrate it. It is a skill. But if we agree it's a skill, which we should, it means it requires practice. And if you rarely go into open water swimming, if only it is once a week that you get to do open water swimming, and for the vast majority, it's much less than that, because for at least 6 months of the year, you're not doing it. And for the other 6 months, you may be doing it once a week if you're very, very lucky. But I find that most people don't. If 90% on the other side, or 100% if your preparation is in the pool, we better start integrating sighting as a skill consistently in your swimming workouts. So we have to, in a pool environment, it is a really good thing to be able to practice and through that acquire the ability and then train ourselves to do it. So when can you do it in your swim? You don't need to be told to do it. You can always integrate it in warm-up. You can integrate it in pre-main sets. And in fact, as we move towards race season, many of your race-specific main sets starts to integrate sighting. And typically, if you are integrating sighting into your swimming, you can do it as simply, if you're swimming in a 25-yard or 25-meter pool, simply swimming and sighting 3 to 4 times every single lap. That's a lot of practice that you can get to get right. And the feedback cue to yourself is, how much of a differential is there between when I'm swimming at pace in the middle of a steady endurance 400, let's say, and how many seconds per 100, or how many total, what's my total time for a 400, using our example of doing it without sighting relative to sighting. And if there is a huge difference, you have a lot of work to do. Interestingly, when I stand up and look at my squad, the athletes that tend to naturally drop it into their warm-up, drop it into their pre-main set, even though I'm never asking them, are the faster athletes. And the reason for that is because they have more emotional capacity, because they don't have to think so much about what their body's doing. But the athletes that need it the most, the weaker swimmers, are the ones that very, very rarely, unless asked to, would actually integrate it into them. So there's a bit of ownership over every athlete. It doesn't matter who you're coached by, what the program says, there's a bit of ownership to say, this is a skill that is special on my easy workouts, but even on some of the more important, tougher sessions, I want to get into the habit of learning and integrating sighting as a skill into my training. Well, there's also a second component of sighting that's really important, which is the conditioning component. If you go tomorrow to your swim and you say, I'm going to, over the course of my whole of my 3,000 meter swim or 3,000 yard swim, I'm going to sight 3 times a lap on every single lap. When you get out of that pool, the first thing you'll do is say, wow, that's actually pretty sore on my head. And the reason for that is that you're not conditioned for sighting. And so if you're lifting your head for sighting multiple times over multiple laps, over an hour of swimming or 75 minutes of swimming, there's a little deconditioning that's occurred because you haven't done it very often and you haven't had much racing that's occurred if you haven't done it for a long time. So there's a really conditioning component to it that's worthy of integration into your swimming. And if we think about it as it ties into swimming, cycling, and running, well, if we're sighting every 5th or 6th stroke in open water for 30 or 40 or 50 or even up to 120 minutes in a half Ironman or an Ironman swim, if you're not conditioned to do that, when you get out of the water and you hop onto your bike, you're going to have fatigued muscles. And that's at the top of the chain across your neck and shoulder. And it's probably going to dovetail into being harder to retain good posture in your position like this on the bike over the course of your 56 or 112-mile bike ride. And fatigue starts at the top of the chain. So we don't want to be delivering ourselves to the last 30 miles of a bike ride and the whole of the run with fatigued shoulders, because it's much, much harder to retain posture. So in fact, it's very important from a conditioning standpoint that at this time of the season, we start to integrate sighting as, yes, a learned skill, but also a conditioning component to it, which is really important. So you are free, you're absolutely free to integrate sighting into your warm-up, into your pre-main sets. When you're not swimming with a snorkel, it doesn't make sense to integrate sighting with that. And even some of your main sets. And a great example might be, okay, I'm going to go 850s fast as a part of this, and then I go into a 300 smooth endurance. Do that 300 endurance and sight 3 times a lap. Boom, 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 boom. And then you go back to your fast 50s, then you go back to your 300 endurance. And maybe the next time you see that set, you do it the same way, but you flip it. My 50s I'm going to do where I'm sighting. My 300, I'm going to do smooth endurance and make sure those 50s are high quality. There's no rhyme or reason. Often I've integrated into the main sets, but even if not, you have the liberty to do it absolutely. So that's the first component of what we can get done in a swimming pool that's really, really important. The second component is a really key thing, but a startlingly simple component: awareness. Absolute awareness of where you're at in the swimming pool. So this weekend we had a swimmer who at Oceanside managed to go off onto a different canal, had a lack of awareness, was swimming in a straight line and carried on swimming in a straight line and didn't take the dogleg turn off to the left and swam 100 meters or 200 meters off course. Well, that's not just a sighting skill, that's an awareness of where you're at in the course, an awareness of what all the other people that you're swimming with are doing. And so often we see people when we stand out on the riverbank or on the beach and we're looking at swimmers and people swimming off towards Egypt. And it's just a lack of awareness of what's going on with the environment around them. Well, you can start to train that awareness in a swimming pool. Case in point, if I stand back on the pool deck and I look at our 5 lanes, we only have 5 lanes, we've got a very cramped swim program at the moment. If I look at our fastest swimmer, who's an Olympic level swimmer, she was the fastest female athlete, including the pros at Texas this weekend. Her name is Laurence, and she's a wonderful swimmer. If she's swimming with 4 people in her lane, she'll always have a complete awareness of where everyone else is in that lane. And as she goes to pass someone, she'll know, okay, I'm going to catch them in about a 75. I'm going to come up the middle and then catch them. I'll tap them on the feet. I'll come up the middle. And there's an awareness of what's going on in that lane. But in fact, because she has so much capacity to think, because she doesn't have to think too much about her technique, she also has great awareness of what's going on in the other lanes. Now, if you're not a background by swimmer, it's going to be very, very hard to have that. But if I look at the other end of the pool and I look at what's going on in there, and let's say there are 5 athletes that are swimming in that pool, it's very clear that those 5 athletes, the 5 weaker athletes, are 5 individual athletes who are executing their swim with very little awareness of anyone else. And so it is always in that lane that there are head-on collisions, that there are people carving across the front of each other. There are people that are standing up and someone else just swims into the back of them. And that happens when there's a lack of experience, but there's also this next step of awareness that you need to develop. And it is a real opportunity, no matter what level you are, of starting to think, yes, you do need to think about your form. Yes, you do need to think about what you're trying to do relative to this set that's prescribed. But there is also this mindset of I am now a member of this lane. And so if you do get to swim in a squad environment, or you do get to swim in a masters environment, it is highly valuable to start to become tuned in to not just what you're doing, but what the other athletes are doing around you. And start to develop even looking at other lanes. And even if you're just lap swimming at your local YMCA, still understanding the timing and the rhythm of the people in the lanes that are either side of you, maybe the lane that you're splitting with, and start to play games with, where am I relative to them? Where am I doing relative to them? What's my pace relative to them? And start to develop, as any swimmer can, an awareness of their environment in the pool space. Firstly, you're going to get less black eyes because you're not going to swim into each other. But secondly, you're just going to start to develop this sense of belonging and sense of participation in a broader group environment. And that's really valuable. It's very, very valuable on the bike. It's more intuitive on the bike. If you're riding in a group ride, the more experienced athlete will start to understand the movement of the group. In the swim, that should happen as well, but it's a learned skill. So you really can, just with a shift of mindset when you go into your swimming, even if you go and swim individually, start to really try and develop a sense of your awareness. It really empowers you. So those are two components. The third and final component is very, very hard to execute if you are only swimming by yourself. So this does require numbers. A second link that I'm going to put into this week's Coaches Bulletin is from a session last week. And this is something that we do every single week, multiple times in the week, which is to get athletes to get used to get familiar with swimming in a condition that is very, very similar to open water. So typically in a lane, and we don't have very wide lanes, we'll put 3 swimmers across the lane, and any other number of swimmers that are in the lane as well are going to push off almost exactly the same time, but push off right behind them on their feet. And they're going to swim a series of 25s where they just get used to the close proximity and physical contact that occurs when you're starting with an open water swim, which is the time that creates the most angst and anxiety for athletes. So swimming very close, actually getting used to having the bouncing contact that occurs in open water swimming, and having that fearful situation become familiar, which then breeds confidence. Now, of course, as you start to do that easy to begin, then you can do it faster, and then you can integrate the top of the line sighting into that. Can you go out hard and fast in close proximity while you're hitting each other, maintaining a calm composure and sighting to see where you want to go? And once you start to get that, it starts to decrease how much of a factor that should be in your overall swimming. And it's a really important component to get right. So I think that in the swimming pool, and you only need for that one, you only need 2 buddies. So if you do go and swim with 2 or 3 people, even if you only have 1 training partner, every day finish it. Doesn't need to be hard, with just a little bit of physical contact, a little bit of familiarity, pushing off in a tight space and getting used to swimming with each other. I think that those 3 factors are the most critical. Learning sighting and conditioning sighting, getting an awareness of your environment behind every single session so that you know what to do. And thirdly, getting comfortable and being familiar with close proximity and close contact while in the swimming pool. Drafting and components like that, yes, valuable. You can do all sorts of sessions where you're pushing off feet and doing sort of chain gang type stuff in the swim. But I think that that is down on the necessity curve relative to those 3 boulders or building blocks of better swimming. And if you start to integrate that, that's going to start to optimize any open water swim training that you do. So, Paulie, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add there now that you're back and live with us.
The main thing that you say here is the best technicians and the most intuitive athletes, be it swim, bike or run, are the most likely to have the awareness to practice those elements of form. You know, the people that you see when they head out on a ride, standing up and testing their standing form, playing around with the rhythm of their ride early in it to check out all their resources. The same with the swimmers. You know, we have some very intuitive swimmers that, you know, Dave Giardini's and so on, who will play around with, he has the luxury of playing around with completely different tools, and you'll see him swim with his hand close to the water, you'll see him swim with a straight arm recovery, you'll see him play around with stroke rate and so on, because he can. But he also has this awareness of doing it. If you want to get closer to being that person who is a technician at what you do, you need to be mindful and engage in those same practices. If you just look at the numbers, you will be missing an important part of it, and that flows into the whole thing of, you know, execution of the training program is probably more important than the minute details. And the same, you know, this is one of the key elements in this event-specific aspect of swim training.
It really is, and as you say, I mean, as with everything, it cross-pollinates to every sport. There's a reason that a less confident bike rider in their handling skills has a much higher likelihood of riding straight through the middle of glass that's on the side of the street. And that's because they're so insular on what they're doing on their bike, and they're so focused that they don't have this sense of awareness. And so they ride through the pothole, they ride through the glass, versus if everything is intuitive and you have developed a sense of awareness, you're going to see the glass coming and you navigate. In the swim, it's the same component. And in the pool environment, athletes, because it is a technical sport, that an athlete tends to need to be told that awareness is important in the pool, and it's less intuitive. But if you start to develop it, it starts to broaden your horizon in swimming, and as the level comes up, of course, it's more intuitive to go there. So yes, I agree. I think it's an important part. So beyond our celebrations, beyond our pool swimming, does anyone have a swimming question today? If not, we're going to go into the rhyme and reason. Super Marcus.
Yeah, quick question. So especially as it relates to open water, right? You have the elite swimmers, let's say, who go out and they're gone, you know, in the amateur level, you know, that packer 3, 4, 5, what have you. Then you kind of what I would call your, you know, A-, B+ folks, you know, those who are quality swimmers who are all trying to kind of get and not necessarily form a group, but find their own, especially as you get to the longer distances. What's your recommendation as to, you know, what should you be looking for? Is at that point, should you be looking to draft? Should you be looking to kind of find your own rhythm? What's the best kind of advice you can give to that second, what I would call, you know, the second wave of swimmers who are really trying to, you know, compete with one another, but also help one another, you know, especially in an open water environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the Paul has a wonderful thing, a saying on the bike, which I've stolen and made my own, which is it good for me or is it bad for me? And it all starts with that. So let me first outline what you don't do, which is you don't give up ownership of your own destiny. So in other words, it's still the truth that the straight line is typically the best line. And so even if you are drafting off someone, you want to retain ownership, you want to have an understanding of what's going on, and you are making a strategic tactical position to swim in a group that is guiding you on the best path to get there. Now, sometimes the group might deviate and you have to make this game time decision of any athlete of, do I stay with my group or do I go the shortest line? And that's different scenarios for different people. But globally, your number one component, I'd say, is ownership for your own destiny. And then, is it good for me or is it bad for me to be in this group? But when you go out and you find your own rhythm, if there is then people around you for you to collaborate with or swim with, your ideal situation for you and being a member of that group is to be able to swim in a group where the person that is driving the pace of that is swimming at a slightly faster pace than you can. because by the drafting on that, you're going to be getting moved. That's the only benefit to drafting, yeah? I guess the other one would be an identically paced swimmer to you that you can sit behind and go that pace and it be an easier cost. That's the other one. So those are the only two scenarios. So the whole time, if you are effectively drafting, your utopian situation is you're in a group where you're sitting saying, this is sustainably uncomfortable. The likelihood there is that you're swimming at a fast pace with a lower cost and probably getting you to a faster swim. But you still in there, what people tend to do is they get in those situations and they go, great, I found feet. And they're now putting their whole swim performance into someone else's hands that they've never seen before, never met with, and assume that they have good open water sighting skills, which is a very bold assumption for an amateur athlete to make. And so you still have to have this ownership and this check-in the whole way. And so often happens, you might get onto the back of the feet of someone, they might be swimming very strong, but if at the turnaround or in the second half, it's getting ridiculously easy, and you feel like you're slowing down, don't just stay there, swim ahead or collaborate and swim with them and you take a turn at the front. So it's not just about finding a group and turning off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And maybe there's a second part of that question too, for kind of, what I would call the gap swimmers that are kind of in between that group as well, that aren't able to sustain and keep up with that pace of the first group, but also might have the ability, not necessarily because they're pure technique, but because, let's say, of open water technique, ability to sight well and feel confident in their swimming technique, to kind of go on their own, so to speak. Do you encourage them just to say, hey, stay at your steady pace, go on your own? Do you try and at some point catch up with the group at the turnaround? You bounce off, and maybe try to relax and just say, you know what, maybe if I lose 30 seconds a minute, it's okay. I'll gain that, when it's to get to transition. There's also setting yourself up for the bike ride as well during the swim, especially in longer course, efforts where you want to be, let's say, with that, top tier or one or two groups leading out, because that does make a big difference in the bike ride. What's your advice around that?
Yeah, it's never black and white, and I'll let Paul give his answer as well in a second. It's never black and white is the first thing. I like triathletes to be very conditioned in the swim, and so they should be, and 1 second is 1 second. So I never really like athletes to give up seconds, because seconds are there to be captured. If you are between, you said one thing there that I'm going to say is a no. You would never set up a swim to say, maybe I can catch the front group after the turn. The goal should have been not to have lost that front group. So if there is any aspiration to swim with a group ahead of you, that aspiration should occur at the front of the race, not at the back of the race. Once that group's moving, with the assumption that it's a group that is being led by the fastest member of that group, whoever's on the back of that group is outperforming than if they were swimming on their own. So you want to be on the back of that group, as it were. So your chances of catching groups ahead, once there's a greater than 1 body length gap, it's very, very challenging to catch groups ahead of you. You'll catch stragglers that have dropped off, that have just overswum in the first 100 meters. But you have to, if you have an aspiration to get to a group, you have to be trained and have the skills to swim fast with that group and settle with that group and stay on that group. So I wouldn't say that it's an aspiration to jump. If you are caught between groups, typically I prefer athletes to swim their own tempo, their own rhythm, staying nice and smooth, keeping the pace really settled. And if that means that they're on their own but between groups, I don't think that that's a big factor. I don't know if you've got a thought on it, Paul.
No, the only time if a group swum off in front of you or you're being popped off the back of it, it's probably you're far better off to swim well at your own rhythm, because the vast majority of our swimmers, including probably half of our pros, their priority in the swim is to swim well, not hard. Because when they get to the place where they swim hard consistently, and that doesn't mean that we're not just swapping groups or whatever, but hard consistently over the thing will yield very little positive benefit and possibly a negative outcome as far as overall return on investment. Where you might want to do that thing of thinking, is this good for me? Is it bad for me? If it's a wave swim and faster swimmers are moving in a group from behind, and you go, oh, just off to my right, there's a faster group. And then with that little trained ability to vary the pace and hop across onto that group and that awareness, that's when you might get a ride where you can go, this is good for me, I can move forward. But if you haven't done the training to do it and you don't have the awareness of your environment, you miss that boat. But most of the time, if you're being tailed off a group, it's settle into your own rhythm, swim well for the remainder of the race. And I understand what you're saying. We say 1 second is 1 second is 1 second, whether it's swim, bike, run, transition, portaloo, or whatever. I do understand the dynamic of getting out with a better group. It's when 1 second in the swim might be more valuable than 1 second elsewhere because you're moving with a faster pace. But if that's the difference between 30 seconds or 20 seconds on the bike, that's not going to be your race dynamic. And as Matt said, because there is a considerable focus on conditioning and swim resilience within the Purple Patch program, swimming well by yourself will have no net negative effect over the course of a race. You will have moved into your bike rhythm and so on, and bike resilience and pacing and so on will be the primary factor within 10 to 15 minutes of exiting the swim. So those things are, I mean, it's a very, very good question, and it's just that awareness thing. You know, it becomes more detailed as you get better and better and better, or the very elite part of the amateur swim or the professional swim. But even within the professional swimmers, we advise our swimmers where to see themselves and to give themselves the best chance of their best ever swim. That same thing applies. If it's not good for you, swim well by yourself, and it won't impact your race in a negative way. And certainly you'll have a better chance of a positive outcome.
Okay, good, thank you.
And just to hammer it down, because I think it's helpful for everyone. Too many athletes have been told by coaches, you've got to make the group, you've got to make the group, you've got to make the group. And so it's this sort of pass-fail component. And as Paul says, just to echo it one more time, to hammer it to death, swimming well by yourself is absolutely fine. Your whole determination of hanging in the group, and if you don't make it, it's a failure, is just a complete myth. But you want to swim with good rhythm, good tempo, in a straight line, and you'll be in a pretty good place overall. And if there are people there to use and you have the awareness to do it, do so. Really do so. That's a great question. Let's stroll over and say hello to Naomi.
Hey, it's nice to be here. It's been a while. I don't know if you've already covered this in recent sessions, but do you have anything to say about scouting the Santa Rosa bike course?
I heard the roads are a little rough in certain areas. I have heard that there's not quite as much personality as what the Vineman course is, even though you sort of cross many of the same roads. And apart from that, I haven't done too much investigation into the course itself. So the answer for me so far is it's actually on my to-do list pretty much this week. Paul, have you spent much time looking at Santa Rosa yet? I looked a couple of weeks ago, but...
Like, how do you recommend?
No, I haven't, but, you know, I would echo my initial looks at the profile. I mean, a lot of the course features are less obvious. You know, there's more subtle changes in terrain as opposed to obvious, you know. And we know that unless there's been a massive change in the way that the local government up there fund their roading projects, the roads are going to be like they are up there, which is
rough,
not that grand. And so, you know, generally relatively smooth surface, but lots of pieces of it are missing, potholes and cracks and so on. So I would imagine that hasn't changed, but I haven't been up there and ridden the entire course. But if you have the capacity to do so, because it's on your doorstep, by all means, incorporate it into one of your endurance rides or whatever. Get out there and do a couple of laps of it, so you can have it firmly in your mind and understand when you're training how those elements of training will translate, into performance on the course.
There's no doubt that if you're doing a race that's near you geographically, it's worth the venture to go and ride that course beforehand. It's one of the most valuable things you can do globally. And, it's an hour away from us globally, especially leaving early in the morning.
It's challenging because it's point to point. So would you recommend doing like half one weekend and half another weekend, or?
I'd just get PJ to come pick you up. I wouldn't, I don't know the answer to that. You can make it a big endurance ride.
True. One more follow-on question. Do you know, or have you heard anything about the run between the swim exit and transition? I heard it's like almost as long as Santa Cruz. Okay.
No, I don't know anything about it at all, actually. I haven't looked at the course in that much depth yet.
Okay.
No. A lot of the races have very long transitions now. Mont Tremblant, the race in China this weekend, half-a-mile transition. Alcatraz, famously. Super Steve, you look like you're a flight control person, but any questions today?
No, not really. Things are good. I've got my first 70.3 of the year coming up this weekend, Ironman Florida, Haines City. Any? Have you heard any pearls about that one?
It's the one thing I know about Haines City. It can be very close. There's a very English saying, very close. So the heat tends to sitting there. It can be quite claustrophobic. And on bike and run, it's much less Florida-like than you would think it would be. There's much more personality in that run. In the last couple of years, they've had a lot of construction, and so the course has been torn up, but I believe that's all completed now, so it should be very smooth on the run. It was very, very challenging to run across all these sort of construction zones almost. Phil, I think you were there, yeah? You've gone through. Maybe you can give a quick 1 minute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm.
Yeah, the bike it can be very windy out there. A bunch of rollers. Pretty nice though. Be a lot of cheating going on from the South Floridians. So you gotta watch out for the drafting. The run will be tough, it'll be hot. And about a mile into the first loop, you'll go up and down a roller coaster, about two different big hills. I call big hills, not Matt Big's hills, but Florida big hills. And then on the back half of the run, you get some shade again, and you'll do that loop 3 times. So if you have to take a lot of liquid, because you'll get up to 100 degrees on the concrete.
And that's a great point, Phil, especially in that area. So I use the very English saying of close, but it's not just about the temperature of the day. It's what it is when you're running at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning and you're coming off of that sort of tarmac / concrete surface. It's much warmer as it is at your body level, and it can be a pretty much a sweltering race. You've got to be thinking about that when you're on the bike course for sure. Any little, I live in a little grade here, and Phil would call it Mount 25th Street, but it's about a 4% grade. So his idea of big hills are maybe a little different than some people's, Steve. But yeah, it's definitely more of a rolling course than you might think. That's for sure. So, Super Scott.
Don't think there's anything for me today.
That means I'm going to go to Uncle Phil. Phil, I left you to last again. I've called on you, but I haven't let you ask a question yet.
That's just the way it is.
Yes, just the way it is. Go ahead. I apologize.
I try to keep my power down this weekend on the hills, but I still was creeping up pretty heavy, and I hadn't been outside much. Is that going to be a big negative, or not really worry about and just go by feel? I was getting pretty beat up this weekend with about a 4-hour ride.
Super Paul.
Not sure what the prescription is for the ride, but you know, in those early season rides where you've got duration and the thing is to get the work done for a start off, and you let the course bring the work to you, you know, and it's that it comes back to that old discussion of understanding of what RPE is. You know, 100% effort on your optimal gradient will yield somewhere between, you know, maybe 7 and as much as 20% difference in power for the same 100% effort, because the work is being given to you. So, you know, a bigger guy like you, it might be, you know, it might be a 3% grade's the optimal place to go and work against. So it follows that at 100%, that if you, you know, if that yields 300 watts and it on the flat, you know, absolutely, you know, full noise is 265 watts, then at 80%, that same variation will happen. So just the first thing to do in those longer rides outside is relentless, riding well, let the course bring the work to you. You know, no periods of doing the same thing outside of the exercise prescription for too long, be too hard or too easy. Just get the work done, get back into the rhythm of riding outside, let the terrain bring the work to you, bank those sensations, and try and apply the physical evolution that you've had from your inside training and so far, you know, this year to the outside environment. So, you know, managing your physical resource, heart rate's coming up a little bit, I might change the rhythm, I'll click up a couple of gears, stand, gain some momentum, sit back down, do a little bit of lower cadence pedaling, control the heart rate, work back through the gears. So start taking your physical resources that you've been evolving and applying them in that outside way. And that's a habit that you want to carry on all the way through the year as work starts getting dumped on those longer rides as well. So just get the work done as far as ride the distance, relentless, ridden well, vary the loads, take your physical tools out and try and apply them on the course to get, you know, best return on investment. And if it's an endurance ride, come back pleasantly fatigued, but not completely in the box.
And the only thing I'd add, Paulie, is because a lot of people are starting to move outside now, it doesn't take many rides. And I think that's really important but you've got to go through a few rides. So if you're getting to ride outside once a week on the weekend, but the in week you're in the trainer sort of thing, you got to give it a few weeks to assimilate and get used to it, and then your outside riding legs will come to you. But that process will be accelerated if you adopt the mindset that Paul just said. So it doesn't take long, but it just takes a few rides, and you come back, and you know, it all starts coming back. It won't be surprising if people's like backs are a little stiff because they've been go outside for the first time and ride 3 hours, and you're like, goodness me. And you know, I had that in Hawaii because I get to ride outside very infrequently, and we did a 10-mile climb, very smooth, and I could feel my back. But it's not that I've got a terrible bike fit or anything like that. Although I think Paul could do better on my bike fit. But it's just a lack of postural fitness for me, sort of thing. It just give me a few rides and I'll get into it, sort of thing, and get accustomed to it. Anyone else want to ask a question before we go? We've got a couple of minutes. If not, we'll bolt. Marcus, I just saw an email flash up around Eagle Man, so thank you. We'll take you up on that. That sounds super. We'll do a little. I haven't looked at how many ethics we have at Eagle Man, but we always have a pretty good collection. We always have 10 or 15, and it's a super race. So,
yeah, look to be about in that range. So yeah. Okay.
We can do a pre-race sort of ride and then have a coffee and get together and things like that, which we do.
Yeah, don't have to worry about the hills there.
Yeah, super. Yeah, not Nottsman Hills, but there is some wind. So we'll talk about the wind.
And then chop in the water. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Marcus, I have swum. I did Eagle Man once. I'll tell you my personal story of Eagle Man. I believe I was an amateur, and yeah, I was an amateur, but it was at the time I was in the first wave behind the pros. But I had the fastest swim of the day at Eagle Man. Is it called the Chop Tank River? Is that what it's called?
Chop Tank. Yeah.
I had the fastest swim of the day. We'll have to go back and look. I think it was in 2000 or so. And I came out of the water in over 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I had a several minute lead because they missed the currents. And so we swam the whole thing against the current, and a half Ironman swim was 32 minutes or something. And, you know, in a typical race, I would have been 22 minutes. It was a very long journey. And of course, that amplified for the poor, weaker swimmers that were in there for an hour when they thought they were going to be in there for 45. It changed the tone of the day, that's for sure. But legendary race eagle, man. It's one of the institutional races that you hope that they never lose.
Yep.
So good stuff. All right, guys. Super. So I will not see you on Thursday. I apologize, but we are generating cool content for you guys over the course of that day, I hope. And then we're back at it on Monday. But I would encourage you to have a little read of Coach's Bulletin. I've reviewed the open water stuff in a bit more text heavy, and there's also some stuff around the Oceanside bike ride and a couple of other things in there. So well done. March on. Take care, guys.